Thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. My name is Bryan Newland, and I have the privilege and honor of serving as the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior. And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee for allowing me to present the Department's views on President Biden's budget request for FY25 for Indian Affairs. That budget request totals $4.6 billion, which is an increase of $651 million over the FY24 enacted level of funding. This funding would go toward the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, the Bureau of Trust Funds Administration, as well as programs within the immediate office of the Assistant Secretary. And this funding is an important step forward to meeting our trust obligations to Indian country, and we believe that it supports the President's executive order to reform federal funding and promote the next era of self-determination. Madam Chair, I've submitted a written statement for the record. I want to use my limited time here today to focus on three important areas of the President's budget: mandatory funding for legally required payments, funding for public safety programs, as well as management improvements. First, we have proposed reclassifying tribal contract support costs and 105L tribal lease payments as mandatory funding beginning in FY26. We are required by law to provide these payments to tribes upon their request, and in recent years, those costs have grown significantly. In FY25, the Department will need an additional $232 million just to cover these costs without cutting funding for existing programs like public safety and transportation and education. Reclassifying these funds as mandatory aligns our appropriations with our legal obligations, and it protects funding for other programs that are essential for Indian country. I also want to speak directly to funding necessary to meet our trust obligations to protect people across Indian country. In FY22 and 23, we were able to work with Congress to secure an additional $131.2 million for public safety and justice programs within the BIA. I want to thank the subcommittee and Congress for working with the administration on those increases to our public safety and justice funding. But even with those increases, our most recent report to Congress under the Tribal Law and Order Act shows that the United States funds public safety and justice programs at only 13% of the total need of Indian country. In addition, appropriations law directed 52% of that increased funding in FY22 and 23 to just 16 tribes. That left only $11.5 million in additional funding to distribute across 182 tribes throughout the country. The President's FY25 request would increase public safety and justice funding by 17% over the FY24 enacted amount. That would include a $33.5 million program increase in criminal investigations and police services, which is specifically targeted to increase the number of officers and investigators on the ground across Indian country. That would fund an additional 222 federal and tribal police officers in tribal communities, and would also add an additional 120 federal and tribal corrections staff at detention facilities. The 2025 budget request would get us from 13% of the overall need for public safety and justice in Indian country up to 19%. Without this requested increase, the Department would have to reduce other public safety and justice programs to meet court-ordered obligations to the Navajo Nation. It would delay maintenance as well as operating requirements at tribal courts. And lastly, I want to highlight the work our Indian Affairs leadership team is doing to improve our operations. We're prioritizing recruitment and retention of staff in critical areas such as law enforcement, awarding officials, which move the money from the Bureau of Indian Affairs out to tribal governments, as well as our realty staff. Within our law enforcement programs, we've worked to ensure that BIA officer salaries are in line with their counterparts at other DOI bureaus to improve our retention and recruitment rates and be competitive with other agencies. We're focused on infrastructure investment by exploring opportunities to address the growing number of 105L leases and data improvements related to facilities. We're also improving timelines for land into trust and other realty activities, and we're working to approach these issues from multiple angles, including resourcing and staffing levels, to improve our processes. Madam Chair, I want to thank you once again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
I thank the witness for their testimony. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Carmen Cantor for 5 minutes.